Tell me in the comments what city, what state you're watching from. At my daughter's retirement party, the one I paid for start to finish, I brought a business proposal worth $310,000 to help her open the physical therapy clinic she'd dreamed about for 20 years. When I asked where I should sit, her husband looked at my flannel shirt and said, "We kept it family and close friends only, Roger. There's a folding chair by the coat closet if you want to stay." Then he handed me a stack of napkins and asked if I'd mind refilling the ice. I refilled the ice for 3 hours. Nobody told me what was coming for them next. Welcome back, if you've been here before. And welcome, if this is your first time sitting down with me. My name doesn't matter as much as the story does, but you can call me Roger if you want to call me anything at all. Tell me where you're watching from tonight. I read every single comment, every one, even the short ones. And before we go further, I want to say plainly that some details in what follows have been shaped for the sake of the story. Names, places, small specifics. Some of it isn't exactly how it happened, because a story that protects the people in it sometimes has to bend a little to protect the truth underneath it. But what this leaves in you by the end, that part is real. I'm 68 years old. I spent 41 years as an electrician in Dayton, Ohio, wiring houses and strip malls, and one memorable summer, an entire elementary school after the old wiring caught fire in the walls. My hands know things my mouth has never learned to say. My wife Carol used to tell people that I loved with my hands before I ever learned to love with my mouth, and she wasn't wrong. She'd been gone 4 years that September, breast cancer. Quick at the end, though slow enough at the start that we'd had time to say the things that needed saying. Most of them, anyway. There's always a few that get left on the table. That Saturday morning, the morning of Melissa's party, I stood in front of the bathroom mirror longer than a man my age has any business standing in front of a mirror. Not vanity, just trying to get it right. Melissa was retiring from 22 years as a school nurse to finally open her own clinic. The thing she'd talked about since she was 26 years old and fresh out of nursing school, sitting at my kitchen table with a legal pad, sketching out floor plans for a place that didn't exist yet. I'd kept that legal pad, still had it in a drawer somewhere. I pulled out the good shirt, the blue one Carol bought me for our 38th anniversary, and pressed it myself the night before because somebody had to keep that particular flame lit. "How do I look?" I asked the empty bathroom, the way I'd been asking an empty house for 4 years now. I always felt like she answered somehow, not in words, just in the quiet, or the way the coffee smelled a little stronger than it should some mornings. I sat on the edge of the bed and picked up her photograph off the nightstand, the one from a 4th of July cookout, her laughing at something just out of frame, sunburned nose, hair coming loose from its clip. Big day for Melissa, I told her. Finally getting her clinic. I set the photo back down, straightened it the way I always did, and opened the drawer beneath it. The folder was there. Manila, thick, rubber banded shut. Inside, it was a full business proposal I'd put together with my own hands over 8 months' projected costs for leasing the old dental office on Brookside, equipment estimates, a line-item budget, and a check for $310,000. Not a gift, not exactly. A loan, structured properly, the way my attorney Diane Kowalski had insisted we do it, same as she'd insisted on everything else in my life since Carol passed and I started needing somebody besides myself to think 2 steps ahead for me. The money was most of what I had left, after Carol's medical bills and the sale of our old rental property on 3rd Street, a duplex I'd owned for 18 years, and finally let go of that spring specifically to help fund this. I'd told myself it was the right kind of goodbye to that duplex. Carol and I had bought it together back when we were still young enough to believe real estate was how you built a future, instead of just insurance against an uncertain one. I tucked the folder under my arm, picked up my keys, and said, the way I always did, "All right, Carol, let's go see what we built." The drive from my place in Kettering to Melissa's house in Oakwood took about 25 minutes, longer if the light on Far Hills was doing what it usually did on a Saturday. I knew every turn of that drive by heart. I'd made it hundreds of times over the past 6 years, ever since Melissa and her husband Trevor bought that house, a beautiful 4-bedroom colonial on a street lined with old oak trees, a house I had personally rewired top to bottom the summer they moved in, working nights and weekends because Trevor kept saying they'd get to the electrician, eventually, and eventually meant never in that family's vocabulary. I pulled up at 9:30 that morning, an hour and a half before the guests were supposed to arrive, same as Melissa had asked. The house looked good in the September light, hydrangeas still holding on along the front walk, the porch light fixture I'd installed glowing warm even in daylight because somebody had forgotten to switch it off. I sat in my truck a minute before getting out, hands on the wheel, looking at that house. 6 years of showing up. 6 years of, can you take a look at this outlet, Dad, and the breaker keeps tripping in the kitchen. Dad and me driving over at 10 at night in my pajama pants because that's what you do for your kid. I grabbed the sheet cake I'd ordered from Buskin's, the one with the little rolled fondant stethoscope on top, and walked up to the door. Trevor answered before I could knock. He was already dressed for the party, golf shirt tucked in, that expensive watch he liked people to notice glinting on his wrist. He glanced at the cake, then passed me at my truck in the driveway like it was something the neighbors might comment on. Kitchen's already got desserts covered, he said, but thanks. He didn't take the cake from me, didn't say good morning, didn't say thanks for coming early, or the yard looks great, doesn't it? Even though I'd mowed it myself the day before because I noticed it needed doing when I dropped off extra folding chairs from my garage. I carried the cake through the house myself, past the dining room, where a caterer I didn't recognize was setting up chafing dishes, and set it on the kitchen island. That's when I heard small footsteps pounding down the hallway. Papa. My granddaughter Zoe came flying around the corner in her socks, 7 years old, missing her front tooth, arms out wide. I caught her, cake and all, laughing despite everything already sitting heavy in my chest from Trevor's greeting. Hey, Peanut, you're up early. I wanted to see you before it got crowded and boring, she said, matter of fact the way only a 7-year-old can be. Then she looked up at me, with those serious eyes she'd inherited from nowhere I could identify. Are you staying the whole time, Papa? That's the plan, I said, and she grinned and ran off toward the living room, and I stood there in that kitchen a second longer than I needed to, holding an empty cake box, listening to her feet disappear. That girl was the best thing to come out of any of this. I stepped out back to see how the yard was shaping up, and it was something else. String lights zigzagged between the pergola posts. The pergola I'd built myself 2 summers back, with cedar I'd hauled from a lumberyard in Springfield because Melissa wanted something rustic but elevated. Her words. A long table ran down the center of the patio, with white linens and little mason jars of wildflowers, and around it, 16 rented chairs with cushioned seats, the good kind, the kind that cost real money. I counted them out of habit, the way an electrician counts outlets before he ever picks up a wire. 16 chairs at the table, maybe 30 more scattered around the yard for the rest of the guests. I figured some people would be standing, mingling. Made sense for a party this size. I found a spot near the grill, started getting my bearings, when Trevor came out holding a stack of cocktail napkins. Hey, Roger, would you mind manning the ice situation? Cooler's getting low, and the delivery guy just dropped a fresh batch by the garage. I said sure. Of course I said sure. That's what I do. I've said sure my whole life, and it's gotten me exactly here, standing in my son-in-law's backyard at 10 in the morning, hauling 40-pound bags of ice into a cooler, while caterers I'd never met set up food I hadn't been asked to help pay for, though I noticed later I probably had, one way or another, given how much of that family's life ran through accounts I'd quietly padded over the years. By 11:30, the yard had filled with guests. Melissa's coworkers from the school district, neighbors, Trevor's golf buddies, a woman in a coral dress who I'd later learn was Trevor's boss's wife. Everyone dressed sharp, holding glasses of something sparkling, admiring the pergola, admiring the flowers, complimenting Melissa on the whole setup like it had assembled itself out of nothing. I hadn't sat down once. My knees, 68 years old and 30 of those years spent on ladders and crawling through attic insulation, were starting to send their complaints up through my hips. I looked around for somewhere to rest, and that's when I noticed it. I walked the length of that beautiful long table twice, reading every place card in its little silver holder. Trevor's parents. Melissa's co-workers, first and last names I half recognized. A cousin of Trevor's named Brandon and his wife. Names all the way around. My name wasn't there. Not Roger, not Dad, not even a placeholder that just said Grandpa. I checked the smaller tables scattered through the yard. Nothing. I checked the little cocktail table set up near the flower beds. Nothing. 16 chairs at a table sitting on a patio I hadn't built but had wired. In a yard I'd mowed the day before, and not one of them had my name on it. The first wave of new arrivals was coming through the side gate, laughing, calling out to Melissa. I stood there, in the middle of that yard, holding an empty ice bag, and something in my chest did a slow, cold turn, like a breaker flipping in a panel I couldn't reach. I found Melissa near the drink table, laughing at something a woman in a linen jumpsuit had said. "Hey, sweetheart," I said, keeping my voice light. "Where am I sitting? I don't see a card." She turned, and for just a second, before she caught herself, something crossed her face that wasn't surprise. It was closer to inconvenience. "Oh, Dad." She glanced toward Trevor, who was suddenly very interested in the grill 20 feet away. We kept the main table to close friends and Trevor's side, mostly work people we needed to impress a little. You know how it is. "There's extra seating by the garage," or, she trailed off. "Or," Trevor said, appearing at her elbow with the easy confidence of a man who'd clearly rehearsed this part, "there's a folding chair by the coat closet," or, "you're welcome to just float. Roger. Whatever's comfortable." He handed me the stack of cocktail napkins he was still holding. "Actually, could you keep an eye on refills? People are already asking for more ice." I looked at the napkins in my hand. I looked at the folding chair he was pointing to. Gray metal, the kind you'd find at a church potluck, tucked against the wall by the coats, like it was an afterthought nobody had bothered to hide. I looked at my daughter, who wouldn't quite meet my eyes. Something in me wanted to say the thing sitting right at the back of my throat that I'd wired every outlet in that pergola, that the folding chairs stacked in the garage were mine, driven over in my own truck 2 days earlier, that the check in my jacket pocket represented most of what I had left in this world. But I didn't say any of it. I took the napkins. I said, "Sure thing," because that's what I do. I set up near the ice cooler, refilling drinks, restocking napkins, standing on that folding chair's opposite number, nothing, actually, because somebody had moved the folding chair to make room for a cornhole set for the better part of 3 hours. My grandson Zoe found me twice, sat with me on an overturned crate for a few minutes each time, told me about her class hamster, and both times someone called her back to come meet Aunt Deb from Trevor's office, and off she went. And I stood back up and kept refilling ice. Around 1:30, a man in a checkered blazer, somebody from Trevor's office, judging by his conversation, wandered over to the drink station where I was restocking cups. "You've been at this all day," he said, friendly enough. "They keeping you busy back here?" "Something like that," I said. He nodded toward the main table. "You catering solo, or you got a crew coming?" I felt the words rise up in my throat, hot and immediate. "I'm not catering. I'm her father. I paid for half this yard and every wire running through those string lights, but before I could get any of it out, Melissa appeared at the man's elbow, smooth as anything, already laughing. "Oh, don't mind him," she said, touching the man's arm and steering him gently away. "He just likes staying busy. Keeps him young." The man chuckled, glanced back at me once, and let himself be led toward the bar cart. I stood there with a stack of red plastic cups in my hands and felt the last of something in my chest go quiet and cold, the way a house goes quiet after you finally cut the power at the main breaker. I thought about Carol. I thought about what she would have said if she'd been standing there watching this. I thought about the folder in my jacket pocket, $310,000 folded neatly against my ribs, and for the first time in 8 months of planning this gift, I felt the whole shape of it shift into something I didn't recognize. I didn't make a scene. I want you to understand that about me. I have never in my life made a scene. Not once. Not even when it might have been the right thing to do. I finished restocking the ice. I helped clear a round of dirty plates when Trevor asked, because a woman near the pergola wanted the table to look clean for photos. I carried those plates into the kitchen myself, past the caterer, and set them by the sink. Then I walked back outside, found my jacket where I'd hung it over a porch chair that morning, and I put it on. I didn't say goodbye to anyone. I didn't need to. Nobody had noticed I was still there in the first place. Not really. Not the way you notice someone who has a seat. Zoe caught me at the side gate. She had something in her hands, wrapped in a paper napkin. Careful. The way kids get when they've decided something matters. "I saved you cake, Papa. The one you brought. Mom said we didn't need it, but I told her that wasn't nice, so I got you a piece anyway." My throat closed up so fast it actually hurt. I crouched down, knees complaining the whole way, and took that little napkin-wrapped piece of cake like it was the finest thing anyone had handed me all year, because in a lot of ways, it was. "Thank you, Peanut," I managed. "That's real thoughtful of you. Are you leaving?" she asked. "I think I've done what I came to do," I told her. She hugged me around the waist, quick and hard, and ran back toward the yard before anyone noticed she'd stepped away. I got in my truck. I sat there a minute with both hands on the wheel before I started the engine, looking at that beautiful house I'd rewired with my own two hands, at the pergola I'd built, at the yard I'd mowed. My hand went to my jacket pocket, found the folder, pressed flat against it through the fabric. Before I tell you what happened 2 days later, when I sat down with my attorney and found out things about my daughter's life that changed everything, including who actually held the power in this whole situation, I want to know if you're still here with me. If you've ever been handed a job instead of a chair in your own family, drop the word folding in the comments right now. Just that. It tells me you understand. And honestly, after the day I'd had, I could use the company. And I'll be straight with you, what comes next gets heavier before it gets better. Some of what follows involves details I've shaped for clarity, the way I mentioned earlier. If you need to step away here, no judgment at all. But if you're staying, buckle in, because what Melissa and Trevor didn't know was that their whole world was about to shift under them, and they had no idea I was the one holding the floor up. I called Diane Kowalski Monday morning at 8 sharp. She picked up before the second ring. "Roger, I was wondering when you'd call. You heard already?" "Enough. Carol Jean Ferris lives 2 doors down from Melissa, and she and I do water aerobics together on Tuesdays." A pause. "Come in at 10. I'll have coffee ready." Diane's office sat on the 9th floor of an old building downtown, the kind with real wood paneling and carpet that swallowed sound. She'd handled Carol's estate, helped me set up my retirement accounts after the sale of the duplex, and she had the particular gift of telling you exactly what you needed to hear, whether or not you wanted to hear it. She poured coffee, sat across from me, and opened a folder already thick with paper. "Let's start with what you know," she said. "The loan agreement," I said. She slid it across 14 pages, both our signatures on the last one. Melissa's handwriting pressed hard the way she'd signed things since she was a girl learning cursive at the kitchen table. $310,000, documented properly, interest-free, repayable on the schedule we agreed to in writing. That's a recoverable position, if it ever needs to be. She took a sip of her coffee. "Now let me show you what you don't know." She pulled a second document, a bank statement, not mine, Melissa and Trevor's. When they refinanced the house 18 months ago to pull equity for renovations, the original mortgage required a cosigner because Trevor's income alone didn't cover the debt-to-income ratio for the amount they wanted. You signed on as guarantor. Do you remember that? I did remember. Vaguely, a stack of papers Melissa had brought over one evening, telling me it was routine, that the bank just needed a formality signed. "That means your retirement accounts have been listed as collateral this whole time," Diane said. "And now they're looking to refinance again, which means they'll need your signature again." She turned the statement toward me and tapped a column of figures. Credit card debt. A personal loan against Trevor's $401K. Payments on a boat I didn't even know they owned. Their monthly obligations outside the mortgage are substantial, Roger. This refinance isn't convenience. It's survival. I stared at the numbers, felt my stomach do the same slow drop it does when a ladder shifts under you before you've caught your balance. "There's more," Diane said, and reached for a third folder, thinner than the others. "I want you to sit with your coffee a second before I show you this one." I took a slow sip. "I'm ready," I said, though I wasn't, not really. She slid it across. A home equity line of credit application, filed 4 months earlier, for $48,000 against the Oakwood house. At the bottom of the second page, a signature. My signature. The particular slant I give the R in Roger, the little hook at the end of the S in Ferris, 40-some years of signing my name exactly the same way. I had never seen that document before in my life. "That's not possible," I said. "I never signed this." "I was afraid you'd say that," Diane said quietly. She walked me through it, the way she'd clearly rehearsed walking a client through news like this gently, but without softening the truth underneath it. About a year earlier, Melissa had emailed me a PDF. told me it was an updated beneficiary form for the retirement account I'd set her up as executor on. I'd signed it on the little signature pad at my bank, scanned it, sent it back without keeping a copy, because Melissa said she'd file it. Somewhere in that document, a separate page had lifted my signature as an image and later applied it to an entirely different piece of paper. In Ohio, Diane said, using someone's electronic signature without authorization is fraud and can constitute forgery under state law. I want you to understand this is not a gray area. I sat there, with that information settling into me slow, like water finding every low place in a floor. My daughter, my Melissa, who used to fall asleep against my shoulder during Reds games, whose first bicycle I'd built the training wheels for myself out of spare hardware because the store-bought ones kept rattling loose. Melissa had used my name to borrow money against a house I'd wired with my own hands. There's one more thing, Diane said, and this time her voice had a different weight to it. She pulled another bank statement, mine. March of this year. A transfer of $18,000 to Trevor's business account. Memo line says clinic build-out, bridge funds. Do you remember this? I did. Trevor had called, said the contractor doing demo on the Brookside space had hit a snag with asbestos abatement, that they were short until Melissa's severance came through. He'd promised to pay it back within 4 months. He hadn't. That came out of my emergency fund, I said. The one I'd been keeping in case I ever needed a procedure Medicare wouldn't fully cover. Diane's expression didn't change, but something behind her eyes did. Has any of it been repaid? No, I said. Not $1. I stood up, walked to her window, looked down at the street below, people going about a Monday like it was any other Monday, carrying their coffee and their ordinary worries, none of which were this. What do I do? I asked. Tonight, nothing, Diane said. Go home. Eat something. Tomorrow I'll send formal written notice terminating financial support and requesting a full accounting on the credit line. That starts the legal clock. And the signature? I'm going to recommend we report it. What you do with that recommendation is yours to decide, but I want you to have the whole picture first. She put her hand briefly on my forearm, which for Diane was practically an embrace. You didn't do anything wrong, Roger. Not one thing. I drove home with that folder on the passenger seat and a kind of exhaustion that had nothing to do with the ladder and lumber kind I'd known my whole working life. This was the exhaustion of having the floor of your own understanding torn up and relaid crooked. I made myself a sandwich I didn't taste. I washed the plate. I climbed the stairs slowly, one hand on the rail, and stopped in front of a door I hadn't opened in 4 years. Carol's sewing room. I turned the knob and stepped inside, and the smell hit me before anything else did. Faint lavender sachet, the ghost of her hand cream, something underneath both of those I had no name for except Carol. Her sewing machine still sat under its cover in the corner. Her reading glasses were still folded on the little table by the window. I sat down in her chair, the springs giving the same familiar creak they'd given for 30 years, and looked around that room slow. There was a wooden box on the shelf, one I'd built for her our second Christmas together, the joints a little uneven because I hadn't known what I was doing yet. She'd kept it anyway, 40 years, through every move we ever made. I lifted the lid. Inside, a pressed flower from our wedding, a photograph of her mother, ticket stubs from a Reds game we'd taken Melissa to in 1998 because she'd begged for weeks. And underneath all of it, an envelope. White, unsealed, my name in Carol's handwriting across the front. Roger. My heart slammed hard enough, I felt it in my back teeth. I opened it carefully, the way you open something you're not sure you're ready for. Inside, a single sheet of her stationery, the pale yellow with the daisy border, covered front and back in her handwriting, tight and careful at the top, looser, toward the bottom the way it always got when she had more to say than time to say it. Roger, I don't know when you'll find this, or what will have already happened by then, but I think by the time you're reading it, you already know some of what I'm about to say. You've always been a good man who loves too hard to see clearly sometimes. I need to talk to you about Melissa. My hands tightened around the paper. I've watched something for a few years now, and I think you'll hear it better from me than from anyone else, even after I'm gone. Melissa doesn't call you when she wants to be with you. She calls you when she needs something. I don't think that means she doesn't love you. I believe she does, in whatever way she's learned how. But there's a kind of love that only shows up when it's hungry, and that isn't the same as the love you deserve, Roger. You've given that girl everything. Your time, your hands, your money. Every Saturday you had left. And every time, you tell yourself, this is the time it brings her closer. This is the thing that finally makes her see you the way you want to be seen. But I've watched you drive home from Oakwood on Sunday nights, looking like a man who just worked a full shift for a company that doesn't know his name, and somewhere under all that giving, I think you already know you're not buying closeness. You're buying the hope of it. I had to stop. My eyes were burning in that slow, building way that arrives all at once if you let it, and I wasn't ready to cry in that room yet. I pressed the back of my hand to my mouth and breathed until the wave passed, then kept reading. I know you'll say I'm being hard on her. Maybe I am. I hope I am. But I know you, and I know if I don't say this clearly, nobody will. You deserve a seat at your own table, Roger Ferris. You deserve to walk into a room and have people glad to see you, not glad to see what you brought with you. Please don't give away everything you have left. Please don't give away the money you're keeping for your own health, your own safety. And if you ever find yourself standing in a room full of people who make you feel like the least important person there, please remember the room is wrong, not you. All my love, now and from wherever I've gone. Carol. I sat with that letter a long time, the room going dim around me while I didn't move to turn on a light. She'd written it before any of this happened, before the folding chair, before the napkins. She'd written it without knowing the specifics and described every bit of it anyway. You knew, I said out loud to the empty room. You left me the map anyway. I folded the letter back into its envelope, pressed it against my chest the same way I'd pressed that other envelope, the one full of money, 3 days earlier. Two very different pieces of paper, carrying the same tired heart. They came on a Saturday, 5 days after the party. I knew they were coming, because people like Melissa and Trevor don't answer a lawyer's letter with a phone call. They answer it in person, where they can use their faces on you. I was in my garage workshop, fixing a wobbly leg on an old side table, when I heard the car pull into my driveway. I set down my clamp, wiped my hands, and walked around front. Trevor was in a polo and jeans, looking like he hadn't slept well. Melissa was dressed carefully, the way you dress when you're hoping the outfit will do some of the talking for you. Dad! She stepped toward me, arms starting to open. I stepped back. Not far. Just enough. Come on in, I said. I'll put the kettle on. We sat in my living room, them on the couch. Me and Carol's old armchair across from them, the coffee table between us like a boundary line I'd chosen on purpose. I poured water for all three of us and left the glasses where they sat. Trevor leaned forward, elbows on knees, the posture of a man delivering a speech he'd practiced in the car. Dad, we wanted to come apologize for how the party went. That wasn't okay, and we know it. What specifically wasn't okay? I asked. He blinked. That wasn't the answer he'd rehearsed for. What specifically wasn't okay, Trevor? Name it. My voice stayed even, not because I wasn't angry, but because I'd learned a long time ago that anger spent on people who aren't really listening is just noise wasted on the air. He glanced at Melissa. She jumped in. I think we got so caught up in making the party perfect for Trevor's coworkers that we didn't think about how it would feel from your side, Dad. That's on us. Is that an apology? I asked. Or an explanation? Her jaw tightened, just barely. I'm explaining the context, Dad. I see, I said. Go on. Trevor cleared his throat. The important thing now is we've got a refinance deadline coming up at the end of the month, and honestly, we need your signature to move it through. The monthly savings alone would really help us stabilize. No, I said. One word, flat. Trevor's face fell. Dad. I said no. Melissa sat forward, and whatever softness had been in her face a minute before hardened into something else. Do you understand what you're doing right now? This affects Zoe, her stability, her home. Don't, I said, sharp enough that she stopped mid-sentence. I leaned forward and looked her dead in the eye, the first time I'd looked at her that directly, since she'd steered that man away from me at the party. Don't bring Zoe into this room. Whatever's happening between us stays between us. Melissa's chin came up, her eyes going cold and flat in a way that told me the warmth I'd seen from her over the years had always had a strategic edge to it. I'd simply never let myself see. You're blowing up this family over hurt feelings at a party, she said. You want to feel righteous. That's what this is. My chest ached, hot and physical, but I kept my voice level. My own father taught me that a man who loses his temper in a negotiation loses everything else along with it. Diane's already sent formal notice, I said. Everything going forward runs through her. Trevor stood up, some desperate energy moving through him. Dad, please, just sign the refinance. We'll sort out everything else after. I stood too. At 68, I could still meet his eyes without tipping my head back, and I made sure I did. The last time you promised me something, I said quietly, you promised to pay back $18,000 in 4 months. Before that, you promised a form, was routine. Your promises have a pattern, Trevor, and I've finally learned to read it. Melissa stood, gathered her purse. This isn't over, she said. I know, I told her. It rarely is. I walked them to the door. Melissa went through without looking back. Trevor stopped on the threshold and turned around. And for 1 second, his face was the face of the boy. Well, not my boy, but close enough who used to ask me to check under his bed for monsters when he first started dating my daughter and stayed over for holidays. Dad, he said, voice breaking, I'm sorry, I really am. I believe you're sorry, I said. I don't know yet if you're sorry for the right things. I closed the door. My phone buzzed on the kitchen table an hour later. A message from a number I didn't recognize. Mr. Ferris. My name is Carol Jean Ferris. No relation, I promise. Small world. I live 2 doors down from Melissa. I was at the party with my phone out most of the afternoon, recording because I thought it was a happy occasion. I think you should know I have footage of most of what happened in that backyard. I haven't posted anything, and I don't plan to unless you think it would help. I just wanted you to know it exists. I read it twice. So had I. Thought it was happy. Carol Jean. So had I. 3 days later, Diane called, her voice carrying that particular flatness she used when she needed me sitting down before she said anything else. Melissa posted a video last night. She said, It's been shared a few hundred times already. I opened the link. 40 seconds. Cut together carefully. Me at the drink station, restocking ice. Me carrying dirty plates through the kitchen. Me putting on my jacket and walking toward the gate. Melissa's voice narrating over it, warm and wounded. We tried so hard to include him. Family is complicated. The caption underneath read, When you give someone every chance to be part of something beautiful, and they choose to make it about themselves instead. My stomach turned slow, like something heavy rolling over in deep water. Carol Jean texted again that same night. I saw what she posted. That's not what happened, and I have almost 4 hours of footage that says so. I'd like to post the full thing if you're comfortable. Your call entirely. I typed back 2 words. Post it. By the next afternoon, it had been shared close to 1,000 times. And that evening, Diane called again, her voice carrying something new underneath the usual calm. Trevor's regional manager was at that party, Roger, a man named Frank Delgado. He saw the full video this morning. He recognized the exact moment he asked you if you were catering solo. A pause. He's apparently been reviewing some of Trevor's expense disclosures in light of what he saw. I didn't fully understand what that meant yet. I would, soon enough. That night, alone in my garage, I watched the whole thing, 3 hours and change of Carol Jean's footage, start to finish. I watched myself hauling ice at 10 in the morning in my good pressed shirt. I watched Melissa hand Trevor the napkins to hand to me. I watched the moment with the folding chair. Heard again, there's a folding chair by the coat closet. I watched myself take it without a word, the way I take everything without a word, and for the first time I understood how that looked, from the outside, not patient, not steady, small, diminished, on purpose, by people who'd counted on me staying quiet about it. I watched Melissa steer that man away from me. Heard again, clear as anything, he just likes staying busy, keeps him young, and I had to stop the video there and press the heels of my hands against my eyes until I saw color. Diane called 2 days after that. The response at Trevor's company hasn't been kind to him, she said carefully. Frank Delgado told me Trevor represented his household finances on an internal disclosure form as having no outstanding family debt. That representation is part of how he qualified for a director-level expense account 18 months ago. Another pause. That home equity credit line, the one you never signed for it, appears on that same internal disclosure, listed as a personal investment gain rather than borrowed debt. The line stayed quiet a moment. Roger, I think you need to prepare for the possibility that Trevor's employment may change significantly in the coming weeks, not because of the video. The video just opened the door. I sat in the dark of my garage a long time after we hung up, thinking about a man building his whole professional life on a version of himself that wasn't true, and thinking, not without some pain, that I understood something about that too, just from the opposite direction. I'd spent years being the kind of father who tried to buy his way into a chair at the table. Neither one of us had been living in the real world. Melissa called 3 weeks later, on a Tuesday evening, her voice tight and stripped of its usual careful management. "Dad, HR called Trevor in today. Frank's asking questions about the finances, about the house, about the loan he says he never authorized." Her voice cracked. "Dad, they're saying he misrepresented things." "Formally. Did he?" I asked. A silence long enough to be its own answer. "He simplified things," she finally said. "He didn't lie exactly. He just didn't include every detail. He left out the parts that would have made him look like he needed help." I said, "Plain, the way you state a measurement before you cut." "Dad, if they let him go, we lose his whole income. Without the refinance, we can't." Her voice thinned out into something desperate. "Can you call Diane? Tell her to hold the notice. Just for a few weeks. Just until this settles." "I can't do that, Melissa. Dad, please. If they're asking Trevor questions about the money," I said, "tell him to answer them honestly. All the way honestly, whatever it costs." She made a sound that wasn't quite a word, something caught between a sob and a laugh, and the line went dead. Diane called that same week with the rest of it. An IRS inquiry had opened on a small event-styling side business Melissa had registered 2 years earlier under an LLC, claiming supply deductions that, on closer look, corresponded almost exactly to purchases made on my hardware store account and my credit card during the years I'd been quietly funding renovations at their house. Roughly $16,000 in deductions that weren't hers to claim. "How did she even get my receipts?" I asked. "You kept physical copies in a drawer in their kitchen during the renovation work," Diane said. "She'd have had access for months." A pause. "Did you ever give her permission to use your purchase records for business purposes?" "Never," I said, and the word came out hard and clean. The Brookside Clinic space, the one Melissa had dreamed about since she was 26 years old, the one, my $310,000, was supposed to fund that lease, fell through when the landlord ran a credit check as part of the standard commercial application and didn't love what he found sitting underneath a household in the middle of an active fraud inquiry. That wasn't my doing. That was simply gravity, finally catching up. The final piece landed the week after that, and it was the one that changed how I understood everything that had come before it. Diane had requested a broader look at some old email correspondence tied to the original mortgage refinance, and buried in a forwarded thread from 14 months earlier was an exchange between Trevor and Melissa that Diane read to me over the phone, her voice as level as ever, though I could hear something underneath it too. Trevor had written, "Once the clinic's funded and the refinance clears, we should talk seriously about your dad's situation long term. He's sitting on retirement money he's barely touching, and honestly, that house in Kettering is too much for one guy alone. There are some nice assisted places out near Centerville, not cheap. But if we handle his accounts right once he transitions, it more than covers it." Melissa's reply, 4 hours later, "Agreed. But not until after we have the money. Once that's settled, we can bring it up as a wellness conversation, not a financial one. He'll take it better if it doesn't seem like it's about the money at all." I read it twice on the printout Diane sent over, and then I set it down very carefully on my kitchen table, the way you set down something that might shatter if you aren't gentle with it. My hands weren't quite steady. They were going to take my house. After the money, after the clinic, they were going to ease me into a facility and take the house. Carol and I had raised Melissa in the house with 30 years of my own wiring running invisibly behind every wall. He'll take it better if it doesn't seem like it's about the money at all. My daughter had written that sentence. My Melissa, who I'd taught to ride a bike in the church parking lot on Fairfield Road, who cried for a week when her goldfish died in 2nd grade, who I drove to the emergency room myself at 2 in the morning with a fever of 104 when she was 9 years old, had looked at her 68-year-old father and written those words down like a plan. Something cracked open in my chest, wide enough that, for a second, I honestly couldn't breathe around it. I opened the cabinet above my refrigerator, the fireproof box I kept there, and I took the folder with the check. Inside, $310,000, still uncashed. He still sealed the way it had been since the morning of the party, and I locked it back inside that box. And I sat down at my kitchen table and looked at Carol's photograph on the windowsill, and I said out loud, to nobody and everybody, I almost gave them everything, Carol. Every last bit of it. Then, quieter, not anymore. Diane called on a Thursday with a change in the weather. Finally, after weeks of nothing but damage. They've listed the house, she said. Went on the market Tuesday, asking $415,000. I set my coffee down. They can't sell it clean, though, she continued. When we structured your loan agreement, I attached a lien to the property as standard practice. Any title search finds it. The house can't change hands until your $310,000 is settled. A pause. They're not in a position to pay that in full. When the math finally ran its course after the primary mortgage, the unauthorized credit line, the realtor's commission, the pending IRS penalty, Diane estimated Melissa and Trevor would clear somewhere around $9,000 from a house that had absorbed years of my labor and most of $250,000 of my money. $9,000 for a dream that had never once included a seat for me. I thought about calling Harold Whitfield, an old friend from the trade, a man, 20 years, my senior, who'd built a small electrical contracting business from nothing and had been hinting for 2 years that he wanted to retire and hand it off to someone who'd keep his 3 guys employed instead of selling to some outfit that would gut the payroll. I called him that same afternoon. Roger, he said, I was hoping you'd finally call. We met at his shop the next day, a low brick building on the east side, with 2 service trucks parked out front and the smell of solder and old coffee inside. He walked me through the books, the client list, the equipment. I want somebody who'll keep my guys, he said, not somebody looking to flip it in 2 years. I thought about the folder in my fireproof box, about the number sitting almost exactly where Harold's asking price sat, and I told him I'd take a week to think it over, though we both already knew what my answer was going to be. The house on Riverside sold in December, to a young couple from Beaver Creek who didn't know its history and didn't need to. Diane handled the lien release the day the funds cleared escrow, and that was the end of any legal thread connecting me to that address. I signed the paperwork for Harold's shop 2 weeks later, in a small office with Harold's attorney present, and when it was done, Harold reached into his shirt pocket and slid an old brass key across the table to me, worn smooth from decades of use. Take care of my people, he said. I will, I told him, and I meant it the way I mean very few things. 3 days after that, Melissa asked to meet me at a coffee shop on Far Hills, a neutral place, her suggestion, which told me she'd thought about the geography of it, same as I would have. She looked like a woman who hadn't slept well in weeks. She stood when I came in. Didn't try to hug me, which was the right instinct. I needed to say I'm sorry, she said, once we'd both sat down. Not for one thing, for the chair, the video, the signature, for standing in that kitchen and letting Trevor hand me those napkins, knowing what it would look like. Her voice caught. I knew what I was doing, Dad, and I told myself it was just one day. It wouldn't matter that much. I was wrong. My chest ached the particular way it does when someone finally tells you the truth, because truth costs something to hand over, and it's rare enough that when it arrives you feel the weight of it. Have you found work? I asked. I have an interview at Miami Valley Hospital next week, she said. Floor nursing again. It's a step back from what I planned. Is it real work? Yes. Then take it, I said, and do it honestly. She gave a short laugh that had more grief in it than humor. I bought Harold Whitfield's shop, I told her. I start full-time in January. 4 guys who've been with him a combined 60 years, and I've got a lot to learn about a business I've never run before. Something moved across her face, surprise, then something warmer and harder to name. Dad, is there a way back for us? She asked. That seat isn't yours just because you're my daughter, I said. You understand that. You earn it the way anyone earns anything, by showing up, by telling the truth, by doing what you say you'll do. I paused. But the door isn't locked. It's just not propped open for free anymore. She nodded, jaw working hard against something. We finished our coffee. On the sidewalk outside, She put her hand out, not for a hug, just her hand, and I shook it the way you shake hands with someone when the history between you is complicated enough that everything simpler has already burned away. Christmas came in cold and quiet. I was in my new shop at 3 in the afternoon, fitting a drawer front on a small chest I was building for no particular reason, when the side door opened. Zoe stood there in her coat, backpack on her shoulders, cheeks red from the cold, like she'd been walking a while. "Papa." Her voice was carefully steady, the voice of a kid who'd decided not to cry before she arrived. "Mom and Dad are yelling again. I took the bus." My heart lurched sideways. I crossed the floor and pulled her in, and she let me, which told me things had been bad enough that she didn't feel like being 7 about it. I made her hot chocolate on the little camp stove I kept in the back, and after a while she reached into her backpack and pulled out something wrapped in a folded paper towel, taped shut with careful, deliberate tape. Inside was a small wooden place card holder, the kind used at formal tables, with a name engraved into the wood. "Papa." I took it out of the recycling, she said, watching my face. After the party, Mom threw all the extra name cards away, and I found this one under the others. It didn't have your name on it, 'cause there wasn't one, so I asked the lady at the craft store to make me one. I used my allowance. My throat closed up so fast it physically hurt. "Thank you, Peanut," I finally managed. Thank you." I stood, walked to the long workbench I'd built the first week I owned that shop. 8 feet of clear ash, room enough for a family twice the size of mine. I set the little placard at the head of it, where the shop light caught the letters. Then I pulled out the stool at the far end, the one I always left empty, and looked at it. "Papa, who's that one for?" Zoe asked. "Whoever shows up with something real," I told her. "Honesty, a willingness to work, not just a last name." 20 minutes later, there was a knock. Through the window, I saw Trevor, hands in his pockets, looking at the light inside, like a man deciding whether he had any right to walk toward it. I opened the door. He looked at me, then at Zoe standing at my side. "Dad, I just wanted to see her. And you, if that's all right." I stepped back and held the door open. Zoe crossed the floor and wrapped her arms around her father's waist without a word, the way kids do when the fear has finally lifted. I went back to my seat under the little placard that said "Papa," and watched my family try to find its way back to something worth keeping. The empty stool stayed empty. Trevor looked at it. "You know the answer," I said. "You've known it since the coffee shop." He looked at me a long moment. Then he sat down beside Zoe instead, in the ordinary chair, the one that wasn't symbolic or earned, just the next available seat. Which, when I thought about it, was exactly right for where we all were. The last morning of December came in quiet, the way good mornings sometimes do, without any announcement at all. I was in the shop before 6, breath fogging in the cold before the heat caught up, running my hand along the ash workbench, the way I used to run my hand along a fresh wall of drywall before the first coat of paint went on, checking it, trusting it. I sat down under that little placard and held my coffee with both hands and let the morning be quiet around me. I thought about 18 years of that duplex on 3rd Street, about $310,000 folded neatly in an envelope I'd been so ready to hand away, about how much of my life I'd spent believing that enough of the right kind of giving would eventually come back to me in kind. I'd been wrong about the transaction of it, if not about the giving itself. I had spent decades trying to purchase closeness in installments. And what I'd finally learned, at cost, was the difference between people who want what you can give them and people who simply want you. The guys would be in by 7:30. Terrence, who'd been with Harold 20 years and hardly said 6 words a day, but whose finished panel work made you stop and look twice. The other two, steady, skilled, here because Harold had built something worth staying inside of, and now I was the one responsible for keeping it that way. The empty stool at the end of my workbench caught the early light. I kept it empty on purpose, not to punish anyone, not to prove a point to a room that wasn't even there to see it. I kept it empty for the same reason my own father used to leave the porch light burning past midnight, because a house worth building should always have room for one more, if they come to it honestly. Trevor had an interview lined up in January. Operations work, a step down from where he'd been, but real work all the same. He'd called to tell me, which was a small thing, and not a small thing at once. Zoe had asked if she could come to the shop on Saturdays and learn to sand a board properly. I told her, yes, no conditions, just yes. I stood up, set my cup down, picked a length of walnut off the rack. Good straight grain, exactly the right weight in my hands. I was 68 years old. I had lost a wife, very nearly lost a daughter, and let go of $310,000 worth of belief in a story I'd been telling myself about what it meant to be needed, and in exchange I had gained a workbench. 4 men who showed up honest every single morning, a brass key on my ring that opened a door I'd built almost nothing behind yet, and one small wooden placard that said Papa, sitting at the head of a table where anyone who came with something real was welcome to take a seat. That's the whole of it. That's what I hope you carry out of this if you carry anything at all. Your worth was never something you had to prove to people who'd already decided in advance not to see it. It's something you build, board by board, joint by joint, day after day, until the people capable of truly seeing you find their own way to where you're standing. I spent years believing that if I gave enough, stayed quiet enough, showed up reliably enough, somebody would eventually pull out a chair for me on their own. They didn't. And somewhere in the middle of finally losing that belief, I understood why. You cannot purchase a place at a table that was never built with you in mind. And no amount of money, no amount of quiet sacrifice will make someone value what they've already decided they're entitled to take for granted. If I could go back and say one thing to the man standing in that backyard holding a bag of ice, it would be this: don't do what I did. Don't shrink yourself down into something merely useful. Don't confuse being needed with being loved. Don't wait around for somebody else to hand you a seat that was rightfully already yours. Build the table yourself. Fill it with the people who show up not for what you're carrying, but for who you actually are. I don't talk about faith much in these stories, but I believe there's something that closes the doors that were never meant to open for us, so that our hands stay free to build the ones that are. Family justice doesn't always look like a courtroom, or a viral video, or a lien on a house. Sometimes it looks like a brass key on your ring, a shop full of honest men, and a 7-year-old girl who rode a city bus alone because she didn't think your name belonged in the recycling bin. That's what I'd call it done right. Not destruction, construction, not bitterness, building. If anything in this story landed somewhere true for you, if you've ever been handed a job when what you deserved was a seat, tell me in the comments where you were standing when it happened. Share this with somebody who needs to hear it tonight. And if you haven't subscribed yet, there's no better time. The next story's already waiting for you. Thank you, truly, for staying with me until the end. It means more than you'd probably guess. A note going forward: some of the stories still to come will carry fictional elements shaped for the sake of the lesson inside them. If that's not what you're here for, no hard feelings at all. But if you're staying, I'm glad, genuinely, to have you here.